So Damion, as a way of sort of starting this as a conversation, and we're going to take till 2:30, so we just got half an hour today. And I'm conscious how much we could talk about, so let's see where this goes. You know, you and I are very conscious when we start this conversation, often in the groups, that an emotion is something we all talk about, and we all assume a common understanding, but actually when we ask people to define it, that can be perhaps more difficult. So from your perspective, how would you describe an emotion? How would you explain it?
Yeah, and I suppose being the coach I am mindful of, I think it's Joseph Ledoux, the neuroscientist, and this is a bit of a paraphrase, but he said the strange thing about emotions is everybody knows what you mean until you ask them to describe them. So I thought, bearing in mind we've got a good group of coaches online, why don't we hear some responses from them? So my question to the group really is, you know, how do you define emotions? Okay. So let's see some comments on the chat panel, and then I'll pick it up from there, Liz, if that's okay.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's a lovely point, isn't it? Because it's something about how we define it, but also how we might then help our coachees to understand it for themselves. So there's a few thoughts coming in. So thank you, Karen and Amanda. Energy, emotion, a feeling, an expressed feeling or a mood. Something that can be uncontrolled or immediate. And again, how it translates then into behavior. So thank you, Ed. It's a form of information. So as you say, it's another form of data that we can use. And Mike, thank you. A felt sense that's often embodied. And Sheila, yes, it can infect others. So some lovely sort of comments, reflections, ways of making sense of it. So just seeing some of those, Damion. And I think I bring all that together.
And this is really, you know, takes us into this landscape of emotions and why they're important for us as coaches and the work that we're doing. And you know, Liz and I suppose you and I have been heavily influenced by Paul Brown and Virginia Brown's work. You know, we did some training with Virginia, and I like the idea that come from their work. And the book's called Neuropsychology for Coaching, and I'd really recommend reading it anyway. But just that sort of sense of, you know, it's subconscious if we think about the primary emotions, and you know, the root meaning, energy in motion, I think is quite a strong definition, because this is energy creating movement in the human system. When we think about those primary emotions, they're there to either move us away from harm for survival reasons, and we know we've got a negativity bias in terms of avoidant emotions, or they're there to move us towards attachment. And of course, you know, they're subconscious until we start to make meaning, and that's where they make feelings. So I like the definition, energy in motion. Which again is why it's important for coaches, but it's, I'd say as well, for me, it's that embodied knowing. You know, we can say to a coaching client, how do you feel about this, and are they feeling it or are they thinking it? You know, and there is a difference. So we know, because of the reaction and the nervous system, that emotions are embodied. And just as we're sort of defining, because I know we're going to talk about how we would work with emotions, and I appreciate some people will have seen this body map before, but I do think it's quite interesting in terms of this study that was carried out across the world, where people were describing their experience of emotions. You can sort of see there the temperature in terms of how warm or cold they are, but also where they felt them in the body. And I mean, this is just a sample from it, but I think again it just sort of gives us a sense of, you know, this is something that we do feel. It's not something that we're cognitively processing, and I think that's important.
Yeah. And as you say, it's that, which is why sometimes we ask those questions, don't we? So what's going on for you physically as you're talking about this? Because it's to help people really connect to what that felt sense is. Because as you said, often we can't, our logical brain can't describe it yet. So we have to just allow it a little bit.
Completely.
So for you, Damion, what's the importance of emotions in coaching? You know, why do we need to go there?
Yeah, and I'm gonna, again, I prepared a couple of slides when I was thinking about what we may talk about, Liz, and I just want to share another one actually, which I think comes from our perspective when we think about the work we're doing at Catalyst. And you know, this is a model that we developed, which we call the session flow model. It really tries to describe what transformational coaching is, which in a nutshell is creating an embodied or energetic shift in the coachee. So let me just say that again. So creating an energetic shift in the coachee. And when we think about that energy in motion, sort of leads us to this realm that's often below the waterline that we're seeing there. So, you know, some coaches are very aware of how they're feeling, but for a lot of coaches they won't be. So, you know, starting to get below the line in terms of starting to really deepen their perception and experience of reality starts to take us into this realm. And when you start to ask questions such as the one you asked earlier about, so where do you experience that in the body, again, we're starting to slow their processing down and helping them become more present to the conversation that we're holding with them. So, you know, this is one of the ways that we try and express, I suppose, the role of the coach in the coaching session. You know, it is about this idea of deepening. But of course, you know, this brings other areas with that in terms of how we're facilitating that exploration of the emotions that are there. And we can come on and talk about that in a moment. So I think that's one thing I just wanted to mention in terms of that deepening, because obviously when we start to inquire about emotions, it often starts to connect to what's beneath the waterline in terms of the beliefs, assumptions, values that are being expressed in this situation as well. You know, the fact of the matter is, we are, I suppose, we experience our life through our emotional system in the brain. So, you know, although we pride ourselves on our cognitive ability, we're definitely predominantly emotionally driven. And so this is something that has to be present in the coaching session. You know, if the coachee isn't connecting to their emotions about what they're discussing, what change is going to happen outside? Because it's great, I can have some clear thinking, but as soon as I leave the coaching session and perhaps I'm having that difficult conversation, the emotional system is going to be at play, isn't it? Yeah. So that's why we need to create that shift in the conversation itself. So that's the first thing I'd say. The other thing, when we talk about you know, creating more challenge and taking a coachee out their comfort zone, you know, so we're trying to hold them in a space where vulnerability can be expressed as well, you know. And again, I like the work of, I suppose, Brené Brown's definition of vulnerability in terms of it being about connecting to uncertainty and risk, but it's also about emotional exposure. So, you know, when a coachee is in that space, it's important they feel held well by the coach, because otherwise shame could follow, couldn't it? So I suppose that's my initial thoughts about why it's important to coaches. Yeah. You know, if we're about creating change, emotion, energy in motion is part of that.
And actually, that last comment, just, you know, that sense of being able to hold and contain when someone is feeling really vulnerable, and as you say, that's being expressed through their emotional response. I suppose, you know, we know that sometimes particularly people who are perhaps coming to coaching or new to coaching can be quite nervous of working in this field, or not in this field, but working with emotion. What, from your experience, what else do you think makes people perhaps a bit, you know, cautious about working there?
Well, I think it's a good reflection point, Liz, and I think, for coaches it's a good exercise to explore your own beliefs about emotions, because all of that is played out in the coaching
Mm.
session itself unconsciously. So, if I have certain beliefs about what emotions mean, well, I'm going to be impacted by that as the coach. I think there is, it's that lovely saying, isn't there? Be careful of what you unpack in case you can't hold it. Um, and I think sometimes this is where it depends on in what we're talking about. If the coach is expressing difficult emotions, um, perhaps unexpectedly, there's that piece of often coaches might be um, experiencing perhaps a boundary and getting concerned that this is moving more into a therapeutic intervention. So which I get, and we can talk more about that in terms of what to look for and what to pay attention to. I think there's also there is this piece around we manage the process as the coach. This isn't really answering the question in one way, but I do think coaches need to be responsible for where we are in the session if emotions are being expressed, because my responsibility is to ensure that the coachee leaves the session in an adult state and so is able to re-engage with their work after the session or their life. And I think, again, that will inform the way that we intervene and the way that we work with the emotion that's being expressed as well. Because if we're near the end of the session, we need to be mindful of what the coachee needs so they can, go back into and operate in their leadership role.
And there was something when you and I were talking earlier, there was something I think you shared about what our dear colleague and friend Diana Whitmore used to say that supported
Yeah.
coaches in this.
Well, I think it's a good point, and we can talk a bit more about what to look out for. But I can always remember many years ago, I was talking to Diana around this very topic actually, um, and she said to me, which I've always found helpful. She said, um, "The thing is, in coaching, Damion, we're working with people that are, and I mean this respectfully, healthy." Um, and she said to me, so there's a self-organismic principle in coaching that the coachee is becoming aware and revealing what they need to work through, and they're comfortable working through it because of the space that's been created. And I sort of think, we're not there to rescue the coachee, we're not there to fix them, but actually this is another form of information. Somebody said it's another set of data. And I think it is, it's a different way of knowing that the coachee may be connecting to. So it's important that we can hold a space for them to really explore the awareness that arises from that. Yeah.
And as you said earlier, and really important that we as the coach, as you said, think about our reaction to emotions and how we understand them, how we work with them for ourselves too,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can support someone else working with theirs.
Yeah, and can I just share something actually, Liz? Because
Mm.
that's a good point. Because I just want to take us to this, because I think this is useful, and I appreciate some people will have seen this before. But Jill Bolt Taylor, the neuroscientist, she describes the 90-second rule when it comes to emotions. And that's the chemical process that happens in the body after that trigger. And you can see there that she says any remaining emotional response is just the person choosing to stay in that emotional loop. And what she means there is the thinking and the thinking loop that sort of exacerbates the emotion and keeps it going. So that's why, in terms of when somebody's experiencing an emotion, we describe it as this emotional wave. And again, there's a different view. We're talking about when somebody's emotions start to perhaps overwhelm them in the session, or they start to really connect that. I think this is why, as a coach, I need to be able to normalize this for the coaching client. So it's finding your own language, but I will say things to the coachee, such as, it's okay for you to experience this and really acknowledge the emotion that we're both experiencing in the session. It's important to you. That's why this emotion is there. Because otherwise, the coachee is often being conditioned to suppress the emotion. On the screen, you can see there at the start of this, the coachee will say things to us like, you know, if you carry on asking me this question, I'm likely to get emotional. And often we can even hear it rising in their throats as they're trying to manage that. They're trying to suppress it and cut it down. But if they can be held, there's that sort of sense of that release that happens, that energy release once somebody's expressed an emotion. They'll often say, as it says on this slide, you know, I feel better now after expressing that emotion. And I think this 90-second rule is one thing that sort of stayed with me. So, you know, if I can hold the coachee in a space, obviously I need to be able to center myself, and that idea of, I suppose, emotional contagion in a good way. You know, we're really holding a space that the coachee experiences trust, and they're true. You know, in an adult state, this is a horizontal relationship, and they feel held. You know, often we can really support them to release this. You know, sometimes asking them questions about how they're feeling will exacerbate that thinking loop, but actually, you know, dropping them into their body, connecting them to their felt sense on the floor so they feel grounded as they release this emotion, can release a lot of energy that's, you know, tiring to suppress an emotion. And I think this is why this wave analogy is so useful.
So I'm really hearing, you know, as you say, you're sort of moving into things that support your practice, Damion. So as you say, that wave concept is a really useful way of helping our coachees understand and normalize what they're experiencing. And you know, of course, as you say, we very much encourage this embodied way of working and an embodied sense to really support our clients to get in touch with what their emotional response might be. What else in your own practice really supports this work for you?
So people who know me won't be surprised when I say the words such as my mindfulness practice. I think, you know, teaching mindfulness and my own practice ensures that I can go into a session in a very grounded state, you know, and actually I'm grounded, but connecting to more attachment emotions mean I'm, you know, walking into a session holding more of emotions around trust and joy, etc., which I think contaminate the coachee in a good way. I think then it means that I'm able to notice shifts in the coachee a lot more, notice shifts in myself. And I think, again, you know, sometimes we may be working with a coachee who hasn't got an emotional language, and that's where the self as instrument, us tuning into ourselves and expressing how we're feeling, is a way of giving the coachee permission to do the same. So mindfulness as a way of working with an emotion as it arises in the coaching session. Talk about what I specifically do if we've got time. Obviously, somatic work and somatic practices, embodied practices, focusing, which some people may have connected to the work of Eugene Gendlin, is something else that also really sort of influenced the way that I work with emotions as they're arising in the session. Yeah, so I suppose they're the main ones. In terms of mindfulness, I just want to talk a bit about that, actually, just give it a bit more detail. And, you know, when we talk about mindfulness, present moment awareness, that's only one half of mindfulness, because mindfulness really is, how are we meeting this experience? How are we relating to this experience? And so you have awareness on one wing and compassion on the other. And so that's how we're meeting it. And I think the same way that I would work with a coaching client around that. So again, you know, making sure they're anchored, making sure that they're paying attention to their breathing. You know, so there's a nice quote, when the thinking mind takes over, it leaves the body and the breath behind, you know, so as a way of grounding the coachee. And there's some wonderful work which was created by Michelle McDonald in the 1980s, and it's called the RAIN practice, RAIN. So it's really sort of has been developed further by Tara Brach, and she's just written a book called Radical Compassion, which is all about the practice of RAIN. And for me, I find that a helpful way of holding a coaching session with a client where we're helping them investigate the embodied energetic sense of the emotion, rather than exacerbating it by paying attention to the thinking.
Yeah.
I just got distracted because I saw a question come in from Julie just about do we have any tips for ensuring that the coachee leaves the session in an adult state? This is, yeah, so I'd say a couple of things really. One would always be giving the coachee choice of what happens next. So, you know, I'm mindful we've only got 10 minutes left. So what do you need so you can leave this session in you know, the best way, and contracting with them about that. I think also this is where, you know, for those who've trained in models like GROW, this is where the wrap up phase of GROW is so important. And often that can get pushed because we're such in the exploration. But one of our responsibilities is that sort of after exploring is closing the session. So we need to make sure we've got time there where we can ask questions such as, so what's been most useful from today's session for you? Okay, so what's the first thing that you're going to be doing? When are you going to be doing that? Those questions take the coachee into an adult ego state, and therefore will support them leaving the session. And again, Liz, anything you want to add to that really?
Well, I think what you've just said actually about it's being very conscious about the kinds of questions I start asking, because we know that just as we can deepen someone's experience by asking questions around what they're experiencing physically or in their body, we can also help them sort of connect with their thinking brain by asking questions that bring them more up into their head. So I think it's that conscious choice I make as a coach as I'm bringing someone to the end of the session about where I'm inviting them to connect to. And on our programs, we often say, you know, if you are really wanting to help someone connect up here, you can simply ask them, what are you thinking about that? You know, will help them connect up here rather than connecting there. So, and the other thing I just say is we're also conscious about when we're in a session, we are talking about time. So we are, you know, not just signaling at the end, but we're signaling, you know, as we go through, so that we're helping the coachee manage their own awareness of where they are in the process. And it comes back to Diana's comment about we're working with people who are, as you say, who are well, and it's a collaboration. So just, I'm conscious of the time, Damion, just a last, I suppose, question around boundaries. So what would be some of the things you would share around the boundaries of working with emotion that would perhaps help people feel confident to work in this way?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm sure I think there's loads more we could talk about this actually. So let's do a follow up. But I think, you know, the key thing, and again, when we talk about emotions, there's different degrees of what's being presented in the session. But let's just say that we're meeting quite an emotional response from the coachee. And I think, again, you know, it takes us back to what we know about the brain and the body. And, you know, often if the coachee is in a threat response, all the energy they've got is about self-protection. So they're not going to have much room to process. And that's why it's really important the way that the coachee, I suppose, works with the emotion and is grounded and is contracting and acknowledging what's there. I think what we're looking for really is that idea of that wave and the coachee's ability to self-regulate their emotional response. And you will, I'm sure people because there's experienced people listening, you know, you will see that when the coachee starts to connect to that emotion and they can start to work through that, and you'll see it in terms of the way that after the emotions release, then they're saying things to you like, oh, I feel better now, I can think better, compared to the coachee that is not in the place to do that. And so I think that's, for me, that's self-regulation, because you will experience a very different thing if that person is in that overwhelmed state and stays there and stays there and stays there. I think the other thing it's a wider thing really, but I always think about, let's just say, because at the moment with COVID and what we're meeting, a person is under a lot of substantial pressure. And for me as well, I'm always collaborating about this level of functioning. So, you know, let's just reflect on what are the signs that we're seeing in terms of how able the person is to function. you know, again, that will really inform the way that I potentially work with the emotion that's being experienced. Yeah, I mean, again, I think, you know, that's our responsibility. We own the process, and I think trust your gut is the other thing I'd say. You know, if it's if you're not feeling comfortable, you know, just be mindful of what may be being present in the session, I'd say. And again,
and hope
you add to that.
Well, I just saw that the question come from Azir, and so hopefully that's sort of given some pointers. So as you say, there's something about regulation and the client's ability to self-regulate. There's something about, as you say, looking at their function, their, you know, ability to perform every day in their everyday lives, and, you know, there's so much more that we could go into. And then there's the piece around trust your instinct, and of course supervision. So supervision is something that we might use if we're, or we might take a client to supervision if we're concerned that there might be something here that we're not sure about. So I'm really conscious of time, Damion.
And I suppose the only other thing is, and again, I'm just mindful of what we're meeting currently, is always this thing around the relevancy of what they're disclosing, if there's any sort of questions around, you know, if this therapy, is this coaching? For me, there's always a piece where how does this link to, because we're leadership coaches, their performance at work, you know. Again, would just be another question.
Yeah, and certainly, as you said earlier, it feels like half an hour's not nearly long enough that we can do another one. So we will put some time in to do our follow-up from this one. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you for all the things that you've added into the chat panel. It's been really helpful. Hope you found it helpful. The next webinar we're running is on the 16th of November at 1 o'clock. And that's all about self as instruments. So it's going to build on this, actually, because a lot of what we've been saying, of course, will be present in that as well. So go well, everybody. Look forward to you joining us on the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.